to look over it too thoroughly to see if there was any crazy spice. He has one Spirit of the Labyrinth and one Brimaz. Those have been the new cards to the archetype. People are still kind of unsure what the correct numbers are on that. Paul says one of each. The only other really interesting thing that I saw, he has 2 Mishra's Factory, which is not a standard card in the archetype.
Okay, we come to the match here. Paul is up a game, though appears to be on the wrong side of an Umezawa's Jitte from Bryan Olvera. He is a player that I recognize from the LA area as well.
Bryan Olvera, yeah, definitely no slouch. Bryan Olvera has a Grand Prix top 8. He top 8 at Grand Prix Salt Lake City in 2012.
So we see Bryan use the Umezawa's Jitte to clear out a lot of match creatures, cast a Meddling Mage. We'll get confirmation on what that's naming here momentarily. Paul with a the Meddling Mage on Manriki Gasari. Paul with a hand of 2 copies of Mother Runes now after sacking the Horizon Canopy alongside of Manriki Gasari.
And those Mother of Runes not going to stick for long should he try to cast them with an active Umezawa's Jitte in play.
This feels like a game that's going to be moving on to game number 3 shortly.
I would think so. Right when we cut to this match, we saw Paul had a pretty solid board presence in play. That vanished rapidly.
Yeah, as Umezawa's Jittes want to do, very good at mowing down small creatures.
Yeah, Jitte, definitely the primary threat in a Death and Taxes mirror. I know. I would assume that it applies just as much in a blue-white-red versus Death and Taxes. Basically any Stoneforge mirror.
So Stoneforge Mystic comes across for 1 point of damage. Paul with no blocks. That goes and puts 2 more Skatas on the Umezawa's Jitte, a Delver Secrets, and a True Name Nemesis, most likely the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I don't know what Paul could have in his deck to claw his way out of this one. Cataclysm wouldn't do it. Ratchet Bomb wouldn't do it.
And Paul taps, so we're going to move on to game 3. You have Paul's list in front of you. What has he got in his sideboard?
He does have the 1 Manriki Gusari, so Bryan kind of had the read there. He has a Pithing Needle, which I could see coming in as kind of a backdoor solution to a game gone wrong with a Umezawa's Jitte active. He has 2 Oblivion Rings, which I expect to see him bring in, again, as an answer to the Jitte. 1 Ratchet Bomb, 2 Cataclysm, 2 Aethersworn Canonist, 2 Wiltleaf Legion, 1 Mirror Crusader. Of that last run, I'm not sure I want any of them.
Sure. And on Bryan's side, this is very close to the sideboard that Owen Turnwald used in his blue-white-red Delver list to win Grand Prix Washington, D.C. a few months back. The list that basically set the table for what this archetype looks like now. A Wear and Tear, 2 Rest in Peace, 1 Red Elemental Blast, 2 Pyroblast, 4 Meddling Mage, 2 Grim Lavamancer, a Grafdigger's Cage, a Sword of Feast and Famine, and a True Name Nemesis. I definitely anticipate the 3rd copy of True Name Nemesis coming in the deck, the 2 copies of Grim Lavamancer. We already saw some Meddling Mages. Don't know if he went up to 4, but he has at least 1 in the sideboard, and the copy of Wear Tear as well, as Paul has Aether Vial, Equipment, and even potentially something like Oblivion Ring in his sideboard as well.
Which we do know that Paul has 2 copies of. We know that Bryan brought Meddling Mage in for game 2 because we saw it. That's an odd choice to me. I certainly don't think it's wrong, but I am not sure what I'm hoping to name casting Meddling Mage against Death and Taxes.
I would suspect it's just the fact that his counter spells are so bad here.
Okay,
Force
sure.
of Will is pretty poor against a deck that's redundant. Spell Pierce has essentially no targets, and so he might just be bringing that stuff in because it's better than having soft permission.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do we know who was on the play, or who will be on the play, rather?
Well, Paul lost that game, so he'll be starting off in game 3.
Well, sure, we know, yeah, okay, but do we know who was on the play in game 2?
No,
we do not.
Well, presumably it was Bryan as Paul won game 1 and Bryan won game 2. We can figure this out.
Logic. Well played. All right. So given that, so let's see. Bryan was. Sorry, you said Bryan would have been on the play in game 2?
Yes.
Okay. In that case, I would not expect him to board his Dazes out, even though they are kind of poor against an Aether Vial deck. If you're on the play, you can actually stop the Vial with them.
Yeah.
So I would err on keeping the Dazes when I'm on the play. Maybe he didn't. So that leaves, as you said, 12 full slots that he would want to clear out if at all possible. So
this is an interesting matchup for me as well because Death and Taxes is the type of deck that doesn't really answer True Name Nemesis. It just tries to work around it.
That's basically what you can do with True Name Nemesis. They're very specific answers. Paul has 1 in his entire deck. He has 1 Ratchet Bomb in his board. But other than that, you just have to go over the top in some way.
So turn 1 Plains from Paul, a turn 1 Volcanic Island, and Delver of Secrets from Bryan. Paul with a Source of Plowshares at the end of Bryan's turn. Bryan contemplates there for a moment. If he wanted to fight over it with something like Days of Force Will, decides to let it go.
And we saw at least 1 True Name Nemesis. I believe I saw a 2nd copy, actually, in Bryan's hand. So Paul is going to hope to disrupt Bryan's mana in some way. If he doesn't, those True Name Nemesis are going to get out of hand.
So Paul with a turn 2 Stoneforge missing, and Bryan says that resolves. Good start for Paul here.
Yeah, Stoneforge fetching Batterskull is ordinarily one of the most powerful clocks in the format. It is not going to do much against a turn 3 True Name Nemesis. Now, Paul might kind of predict that and go for a different... Nope, he's going for the Batterskull.
So Paul goes ahead and gets Batterskull and passes the turn back to Bryan.
Okay. It's like Bryan access to another Swords. I would not at all be surprised to see him go ahead and get that Stoneforge out of the way before... No, he has a Bolt as well. That will do the trick.
So plays a Scalding Tarn, uses the Volcanic to Lightning Bolt. Paul's Stoneforge Mystic passes the turn back.
And the question is, does Paul have any more threats? We know he has a Batterskull, which will not be coming into play anytime too soon.
So Horizon Canopy from Paul. Taps 2 mana and attempts to resolve Thalia, Guardian of Thraben.
If Bryan wants to do any brainstorming, he would have to do it in response. One of the very frustrating things about playing against Thalia, Guardian of Thraben is if you have 1 mana open and you have a 1 mana removal spell, you cannot end step kill the Thalia, even though you fully intended to use your removal at end step.
Typically, Thalia is supposed to be good against decks like Storm, but also very good against the Brainstorm, Ponder, Bolt, Swords of Plowshares decks of the world as well.
Yeah, these decks are very conservative with their mana in the sense that they trim lands because of things like Ponder and Brainstorm. When your deck is full of spells that cost 1, making all those spells cost 2, definitely a very powerful effect.
So going back to Bryan's turn here, he sacrifices a Scalding Tarn, gets a copy of Volcanic Island, and we're going to find out momentarily if he does have True Name Nemesis. Taps 3 mana, and there it is. So now we're going to see if Paul is able to work his way around this.
I think that I saw Sword of Fire and Ice tucked there in the back of Paul's hand. I might have imagined that. That is not a solution exactly to True Name Nemesis, but it, again, as we said, is a way around it.
Yep. So Paul trying to figure out exactly how he wants to proceed from here. Very challenging card for his mono white creature deck to answer. In fact, impossible to answer. Simply something he may or may not be able to work around.
Yeah, as we said, he has 1 Ratchet Bomb in his entire 75 as a way to actually get that True Name Nemesis out of play once it's there. And it needed to have been in play ratcheting up for some time now to be an answer with any sort of efficiency.
But Paul proceeds forward, plays a Mother of Runes, and a Spirit of the Labyrinth.
Okay, so Paul's put himself in a position where if Bryan just starts attacking with the True Name Nemesis, Paul attacks back better.
See, Bryan, I believe, picked up Umezawa's Jitte this turn.
That is very, very bad news for Paul. That's going to cost 1 extra, so yeah, Paul quickly points that out. So Thalia essentially on time walk duty here. If Bryan had been able to spend 2 mana, spend 2 more mana to equip this turn, and go ahead and get the Jitteing going, I would be very surprised if Paul could come back from that.
So Paul still facing down the gun here. Draws Hand of Batterskull, Sword of Fire and Ice, and Plains. And no reasonable answer in sight to this True Name Nemesis and Umezawa's Jitte. And he can't even cast or equip his equipment this turn, again, because of his own Thalia.
Yeah, that Sword of Fire and Ice being kind of doubly disrupted by Paul's own spells. Not only can he not cast it for 3 mana due to Thalia, but were he able to cast it and equip it, he wouldn't be able to draw a card with it due to Spirit of the Labyrinth.
So Paul goes ahead post-combat after attacking with Spirit of the Labyrinth, and Thalia tries to pay 4 mana for Sword of Fire and Ice. Bryan, with his 1 mana left over, pays a mana and Force of Wills the sword. And now we know what happens next.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Paul slowly loses his X1s. So Bryan, assuming he equips, which it looks like he will, is going to get an opportunity to kill 2 of the 3 creatures that Paul has in play. And I'm actually not sure which one he cares about the least here.
I would get rid of Spirit of the Labyrinth first because that's the card most likely to result in a game loss. If I'm in Bryan's seat, and I'm pretty sure that's
Okay.
the way he's most likely to lose this game.
That's fair.
Good read by Bryan. I like taking care of the Spirit Labyrinth first.
Okay, that's reasonable. Paul actually he does have Horizon Canopy sitting in place, so okay, not for long. There we go. Bryan sees all the angles.
Yeah, so Bryan goes ahead, cuts off a lot of Paul's resources here, adds a Grim Lavamancer to the board, another problematic threat for Paul, facing down True Name Nemesis. Blue Umezawa's GT on it. Paul's board, just a Thalia, some lands, Rashad Port among them. But ever the faithful servant, Paul's Thalia keeps trucking on in.
Oh yeah, and Paul, like that Talia doing just as much damage to Paul at this point as it is to Bryan. That is probably the primary reason that Bryan decided that's the one you can keep.
So Paul post-combat spends 2 mana on Aether Vial. Paul upkeep uses Rashad Port on Bryan's, I would assume, Tundra as its only source of white mana.
It kind of looked like we caught a flash of a Swords to Plowshares as the last card in Bryan's hand. Even if that's what it was, I am not sure he needs to cast it here.
You could not sculpt up a much better draw for Bryan this game.
No, I don't think so.
The Grim Lavamancer being the cherry on top, really.
Completely unnecessary, but delicious.
So True Name Nemesis across, Jitte triggers.
And I'm not sure what Paul can draw to wiggle himself out of this one.
It's certainly not a second copy of Thalia. Paul looking down the light totals. Just keeps on keeping on. Attacks with Thalia. Bryan says, that's fine. Not even going to bother to kill it with my Grim Lavamancer. End of turn, shoots it down.
Okay. Yeah, and I love that Bryan did not kill the Italia in combat, perhaps sensing that there was a second copy. And Paul has seen enough.
And there's the concession. Bryan Olvera wins against Paul Rietzl 2-1. True Name Nemesis plus Umezawa's Jitte still good against one-toughness creatures.
Yeah, especially good against one-toughness creatures. Honestly, just still good.
Yeah, still good in general, particularly good there. Bryan Olvera moves to 7-0, likely in a position to start double drawing. Paul 6-1 and now back against the wall. Sort of what we saw yesterday. Paul losing his winning in the last round of the Swiss and Standard. Had a very good record throughout the day and just fell a little bit short.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be stunned if Bryan cannot double draw in. But Paul, certainly still in it. Paul's a trooper.
He is. As you see, in that game where he's still just, as bleak as things are looking, he's still trying to figure out his attacks. Just not a lot to be done against that mixture of cards.
Sure.